Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer at the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations feature leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry and are scheduled twice a month. Before we get to today's conversation, quick housekeeping note. We'll be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of the session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type in and send it away to us. We'll be collecting them, try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today's episode is the second of our two-part Creative Trends and Ideas series. Today, the discussion continues as we look at keeping your creative fresh and engaging. I'd like to welcome PDMI Brand Response Council Chair and Moderator Chris Foster of Modern Postcard and fellow Brand Response Council member Shira Witelson of RSLT as they chat about how brands are measuring ad fatigue and ways to navigate the proper path through the rapids of needing to be everywhere, all the time, on every device. Chris, Shira, welcome and take it away.
Thanks so much, Thomas, and welcome in, Shira. We're so glad you're here. So this is part 2 of Creative Trends and Ideas. As it is, it's also episode 53, so congratulations, Shira, on being a 53. As we mentioned in part 1 of Creative Trends and Ideas, there are no shortage of channels through which to tell your brand story. So alongside figuring out the job of each channel and how messages change for each channel, agencies and brands also have to figure out how to stay fresh. So combating or diagnosing and then combating ad fatigue, it's an enormous challenge. Consumers are receiving over 10,000 marketing communications a day, and brands need to maintain their position, their posture, their brand style and feel, and their storyline, but they can't be repetitive or boring. They got to keep it fresh. And so helping us to talk through that and navigate that is Shira. So thank you, Shira, and welcome in. So I guess the first question that I'd like to ask you is, what do you mean when you talk about creative fatigue? What's that concept all about?
So first, Chris, great to see you, and thank you for letting me be here. So creative fatigue, it's exactly how it sounds. Your audience has seen a bit too much the same commercial, and they are getting fatigued from it. It can happen for many reasons. So the frequency is too much. The creative is not so engaging, and etc. There's really many reasons why it can happen. Yep.
So I guess the question is, clearly in the data sets, there might be signs that a creative is softening in its impact, or like you said, it's getting kind of tired. What are these signs that point to those indications?
It's a great question. So industry-wide, the way it's looked upon, it's by looking at the relationship between impressions and engagement. So for example, click-through rate. You see, for example, a low click-through rate. Industry, they say it indicates, for example, creative fatigue. But there is a pitfall in looking at it in this way, because this is really, in fact, a point in time. What do I mean by that? This can be a temporary diagnosis, right? So, for example, for our earthquakes, right? Give an example of earthquakes. Let's say you listen to the ground and you hear like a blip and say, there's something happening, let's run. But then the earthquake will happen in 100 years from now. So looking at a small point of time as a drop and then assuming this is because of creative fatigue, it's wrong, it's misleading. Yeah, so there's other way to do it. Yeah.
I guess a question that I would ask too is that if you do see, kind of this relative baseline, CTR that a brand says, that, everyone has these walk around numbers, they get a feel for the numbers, right? They're not always necessarily definitive, but they are directional. So you understand the direction that these numbers and kind of a bandwidth or a range of what response rates feel normal, right? And once they start dropping down, it's relative to other response rates they had. But once it starts dropping down, isn't that already past the point of fatigue? And fatigue actually happened earlier in time?
Genius. I love it. It's exactly what's happening. In fact, what you just said, I call it realization point. There is what's called the saturation point. Is the point where ad fatigue is occurring. That's it. It's everything is saturated, exhausted, but then you don't know it yet. You realized it after a week. And between the saturation point to the realization point is where you start to lose money.
Right.
So this is, in fact, what Resort is doing a bit different. We believe in predicting the saturation point, when it will happen, ahead of time. Because when you know when it's going to happen, right, you can be proactive. You can change your investment and not wait till the last minute, and then get to a point where you get to this realization point and you're already lost.
So I love that, because one of the challenges with so many marketing metrics is that it's a rear view mirror. It's what happened in the past, and it doesn't, and by the time you change or make adjustments, it's based on what happened weeks ago. So I love your concept of that delta of time between saturation and realization, and that's really the most precarious part of response, where the spend is not as effective. So
Correct.
How then can you start predicting that saturation? Do you have any examples of where that shows up?
Yes, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
I sure can.
Perfect. So this is a great example. We've been, a media buying agency reached out to us after they almost finished their campaign. And they asked us, tell us how we did. So in fact, this is in a post analysis, but I first want to show this because to understand the idea of the saturation and the realization points. The gray line is the trend of the engagement, right? So this is the investment in media spend, and this is the impact. So for example, any type of engagement, like visits to the website. The media buying agency stopped their investment here. But the saturation point was here.
Right.
So they lost around $800,000 just for one channel. Now, what the best way to do it is, in fact, it's to predict that gray line. And when you here in the pre-saturation period, then is where you start to change your investment. So this is the best way to do it, not to pass this area, but really forecast when will you get here, and then you can evitate to spend all this extra spend.
So a question I would have for you, Shira, is that do you see patterns in the data across either different industries or different creatives or even different media networks where left unchecked, this this sloping mesa, right, which is almost what it is. The mesa is like a table, right? So you imagine when you start going over to that table, that mesa, that's really where the line is. Is this a common visual pattern that you're seeing with programs?
So we see it when we do post analysis. Yes, we see things that happened in the past. The idea, what we do, when company work with us, we in fact track it. They don't really reach that table. This is the idea. We tell them here, red alert, you're about to get to the saturation point. Time is to divert your investment. But yes, we see in post analysis when we are contacted for post campaign analysis, then it's where we see it, and we can see it in across from TV, podcast, radio. It happens in all different kind of media, definitely.
Okay, so I guess the question that I would have is, at what point, what are those signals that you see? Is it simply a decrease in the click-through rate in terms of the rates that you normally see, or is there something else?
So for example, it's visits to the website.
Got it.
Right? So, a commercial was aired. What happened to the trend in visits to the website that followed that specific commercial? So this is an example of engagement. Yeah, I can, let me share something else quickly. Here is a good example. Can you see the black line here?
Sure.
So this is based on a few points of data at the beginning of the campaign, the trajectory of the visits that could have been. But because of an optimization has been going on, because the tracking of the creative fatigue was done, you can increase, when you forecast at fatigue, you can increase the efficiency of your campaign. In other words, you can increase the lifetime of your creative. You need to forecast that saturation point. Once you forecast it, you can give it a new life.
So I guess one of the questions that I would have is, if I'm a brand or an advertising agency and I'm thinking about, gosh, okay, it's this normal inevitable pattern unless I do some changes. So what 3 recommendations would you have to avoid the creative fatigue that doesn't have to be inevitable?
Yeah. So there's
and if
different
you're also
ways.
too, if you're done with the slides, go ahead and stop sharing.
Oh,
perfect.
Did it stop? Yep.
Perfect. There we go.
Awesome. So here's my recommendation. First, you need to diversify, because, for example, let's say you're going to get to a saturation point soon, and then you look at what you did till now to get to that point. Let's say you invested everything on Prime. All what you have to do is to diversify, try other day parts, try other days of the week. You don't need to recreate your creative from scratch. It's a waste, because everybody that creatives knows how expensive it is. So it's the first thing that I always recommend is to look what was done for when the forecast of the creative of the saturation will happen, what was done till now. Let's say, for example, we forecast that currently your saturation is at 80%. But then we look, okay, what happened till now? Everything, for example, was on Prime. Diversify. Try morning. Try a Monday instead of a Tuesday. So this is one way to do it. Another way is smarter creative. So for example, change small element in your creative. So same creative, but a bit of different offer, like 10%, 5%. And your creative stayed the same, but very small element change. In that way, you can also check what's working, A/B testing, what is talking to your audience, what offer works the best. So this is another way. And third is really monitoring creative fatigue. I always say that attribution is only part of the story. To get a fully optimized campaign, you need to take creative fatigue or advertisement fatigue, if it's on channel, whatever parameter you want to check it. You need to take it into account, because without both, you will not have a fully optimized campaign. Looking at a specific point of time, it's not enough. You need to have the full view.
So are there ranges that you think, Shira, looking at a variety of campaigns from a variety of industries and brands, is there a certain time frame where it's reasonable to expect to change? Is it 3 months, 6 months, X number of impressions? What have you seen?
Oh, so it differs so much, right? Because it's all depends on the size of your investment and how you diversify your investment. Right? Again, if you put everything on one channel, on one day part, on one day, of course, things will happen quicker, much quicker. But if you are diversified, it can take several months till this creative gets exhausted.
Sure.
But one thing to take into account, when you diversify, and I recommend to diversify, you need to do it smart, in a smart way. You need to put enough investment to get statistical read, right? Because to get some results in the beginning, it's not enough. You need to wait a little bit. And then when you get a statistical read, then you can say, okay, this is where I'm going to get saturated, and this is where I'm still, can continue. So do diversify, but do it in a smart way.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and I can see how the time change for changing the creative, which is the most drastic change, because once you've done it, it's out there, it's the asset you want to use. I think of a brand like Geico, where I think that they've baked that into their model, where they know that they're going to have fatigue. So it's the same message, right? The message doesn't change. It's just the creativity for all their ads, I think, is so varied and interesting that there isn't a fatigue, because there's so many versions that they've created that they can swap in and out.
I think Geico is a great example, because they also have, it's of course it's about a great allocation and monitor and everything, but when you have a great creative, like the one, with the caveman, right? Right?
There's so many of them. Yeah.
Yes, there was one specific in the airport, I remember. It's amazing. So it can last long. So there's so many parameters that you need to take into account. Good design, good allocation, and tracking.
So one question that I do have is, on the last Take 20, Ken Carey spoke about using digital methods to test creative before investing in TV or kind of these longer form ads. Is that something that you concur with and recommend? Does this testing help?
Okay, so here's my take on that. I believe that digital and TV can be different audiences, not always. So for example, if you test on CNN.com versus CNN, the TV channel, yes, the audience might be similar, but you want to get, again, in a good read, you want to test an audience in digital that will work also on TV. So it's something to think about it.
Right.
The second thing, when you test on digital first, you can lose the surprise effect. So what do I mean by that? Take the Coinbase commercial, right, with the QR code. Everybody talked about it, even if you liked it or you didn't. Everybody talked about it after it aired. But if they would have tested before on digital, they would have loses that surprising effect.
That's interesting. I guess depending on the scale and the kind of brand that it is, right? If you can have a very small digital audience and test one or two parameters, and don't and you don't risk the saturation of the exposure when you go to a broad format. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I like that idea, and you want to avoid losing the surprise. That's a great phrase. Well, believe it or not, we are already at 20 minutes. Which is amazing, because everything you're saying is so fabulous. Like, hanging on everything you're saying. John and or Thomas, do we have questions from the audience that we want to pull in?
We do. We had two that were very similar, and then a third one that was interesting as well. So I'll try to give you the one that were similar in kind of one take. And really it comes down to pre-planning strategy after they've suffered from creative fatigue. Can you recommend a strategy of how a brand can best pre-plan their creative to ensure they avoid creative fatigue? The other one was basically, once you have an experience with creative fatigue, what strategies can you put in place in advance of upcoming campaigns? So same idea.
Yep. So I can tell you that with one agency that we worked with for an insurance company, they wanted to know that they're using the right creative. They wanted to test it, right? So what we recommended, start with a small region in the United States, start there, increase the amount of region, and then you can start to to test your creative, where it's getting fatigue, where it's not. So this is one way to do it. It's not go ballistic or national first. It's really to start small, but I recommend again on TV rather than on digital, because if your medium is going to be TV, test it on TV. This is my take. Then to avoid creative fatigue, I think it's related to what I said earlier. If you predict when the saturation point will happen, and you know what you did till now, it's very important to know how to diversify, because again, you don't want to put the same investment again on the same sub-channel, I call it, right? The day part and the day. You don't want to put it on the same again and again. But I hope this is answering the question. Yeah.
I think that was good, very good. This question, there's actually a fourth question too. I'm gonna drop it in there, even though it came in right as Chris was asking a very similar question. Does creative fatigue shift from vertical to vertical? Like,
yes, it depends how you are organizing your campaign. Mm-hmm. Is it in parallel? Is it sequential? Right? It depends of your strategy. So it can be if you are overwhelming your audience at the same time, bombarding them with digital, with the podcast, with radio, with TV all at the same time. Of course, that fatigue will be reached sooner. But on the other end, it's smart to do it in parallel because it's increased awareness. Mm-hmm. So there is like you have to think about both. And there's, in that case also, you need to monitor your full campaign fatigue, not on specific channels. So you need to monitor the fatigue at the creative level, but also at the channel level and also the campaign level. And when you have the three parts, then you can get a better picture of moving from one media to another.
Makes sense. Last one. Have you worked with a client that's experiencing creative fatigue and found ways to resuscitate a particular campaign, or is the answer always new creative?
No, yes and no. We never recommend to, in fact, almost to do new creative. It takes time to create them. So we really trying to work with them to find new allocations. So this is the whole idea. It's to evitate to have new creative immediately, right? So when you forecast your saturation point, then you can get right to work. Really analyze what you did till now on that specific channel, on that specific creative, and then start to test other parameter for that specific creative. So again, I can give again the example of the Prime. We had one brand that one channel was almost saturated, but then when you looked at what they did till now, they put everything on Prime. So without looking at it, they would have stopped that creative, right, and put a new creative. But we said, no, you can continue with the same creative, just diversify. But this, you need to do this prediction to be ready for that. Because again, you don't want to get to this realization point where it's too late and then waste so much.
Yeah, and also too, I think to your earlier point, Shira, the most expensive and time-consuming thing of all, in both material cost but also people cost, is a new creative, right? I mean, that's the harder and the heavier lift.
Yeah, definitely. It's extremely expensive.
Well, great. Thank you, Shira, for all the wonderful thoughts and the really great insight on this topic. Always a pleasure to have you here with us. Chris, thank you. Thank you for your stellar effort as always as our host. We appreciate that as well. And we look forward to hearing more about this topic as we move forward. Your next scheduled opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 episode is Wednesday, October 12th, when I will join Chris to chat about what you can expect at PDMI West in San Diego on October 24th through 26th. From networking to education, the calendar is full, so we'll try to give you some inside tips on how to navigate it. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 for the webinar, to register for the webinar and to check out our upcoming schedule. Of course, that said, registration continues to be open for PDMI West, and it's been booming of late. Plus, there's still a chance through next Monday latest, pending a sellout, for badge holders to get into the PDMI's discounted room block at the Hard Rock Hotel San Diego. Visit thepdmi.com/PDMI-West for more information and to book your badge today. Thanks again for joining us and checking out this episodes of the PDMI's Take 20. Be well. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.